The gunshot cracked through the silence of Willow Creek like a whip, sending a flock of startled crows into the azure Montana sky as Abigail Irwin's heart sank in her chest. It wasn't the sound that troubled her. Gunshots were common enough in 1876, but rather who had fired it. Her father, once again demonstrating his disdain for her suitor, the man now striding toward her with determination in his eyes and a bullet hole through the brim of his hat. "That's the third hat this month, Miss Abigail," drawled Andrew Irving, his voice calm despite having nearly caught a bullet with his forehead. Dust coated his worn denim and leather, a stark contrast to her carefully pressed dress. "Your father's aim is improving." Abigail turned her gaze toward the imposing two-story house behind her, where her father stood on the porch, rifle still smoking in his hands. The town's most successful banker had made his feelings about the dirt-poor cattle driver abundantly clear. "He'll kill you next time, Andrew," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she reached up to touch the hole in his hat. "This isn't some game." "No, madam," Andrew agreed, removing his hat and turning it in his calloused hands. "It surely isn't. Which is why I'm here to ask you something important, something I've been meaning to ask for a long time now." Before Abigail could respond, her father's voice boomed across the yard. "Irwin, get back in the house. And you, Irving, next bullet goes between your eyes, not your hat." Andrew didn't flinch, his green eyes fixed solely on Abigail's face. The setting sun caught in his sandy hair, giving him a halo of gold that made her heart ache. He'd come to Willow Creek 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on his back and a talent for breaking wild horses. Now he owned a small parcel of land outside town and a reputation as the hardest working man in the county. "I ain't asking your father," Andrew said quietly. "I'm asking you. Come away with me, Abigail. I've saved enough to start us proper. It won't be easy at first, but we could build something real." Abigail's breath caught. Her father's banking empire had given her every comfort, but also kept her caged like one of her mother's exotic birds. At 22, she'd watched her friends marry and start families while she remained under her father's thumb. "You'll be laughed at," she said, her voice barely audible over the rustle of the wind in the cottonwoods. "The banker's daughter running off with a cowboy. They'll say I've lost my mind." Andrew's sun-weathered face broke into a smile that warmed her from within. "Then let them laugh while we build a life," he said, reaching for her hand. "Their laughter will fade, but what we build together, that'll last forever." Behind her, the screen door slammed. Her father was coming, his heavy footsteps thundering down the porch steps. "Yes," she whispered, the single word changing everything. "Yes, Andrew." He squeezed her hand, then released it as her father approached, shotgun now replacing the rifle. "Tomorrow night," Andrew said under his breath. The old cottonwood by the creek. Midnight. Then he tipped his hat to her father with exaggerated politeness, mounted his chestnut mare, and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and a promise hanging in the warm evening air. The hours until midnight the following day stretched like molasses in winter. Abigail packed a single carpet bag, taking only what she could carry: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the small leather pouch of gold coins she'd saved from her allowance over the years. Her room, with its lace curtains and feather bed, suddenly felt like a stranger's. Her father had been in an unusually good mood at dinner, announcing that Harold Edwards, the 40-year-old widower who owned the mercantile, had formally requested permission to court her. "A fine match," he declared, not noticing how the color drained from Abigail's face. "Respectable. Secure." Now, as the grandfather clock downstairs struck midnight, Abigail slipped out her window and down the trellis, her heart pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks as she darted through the shadows, praying none of the ranch hands would spot her fleeing figure. Andrew was waiting by the cottonwood, 2 horses saddled and ready. His face broke into a relieved smile when he spotted her. "You came," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Did you think I wouldn't?" She reached up to touch his face, marveling at her own boldness. "Your father could give you everything. I can offer you only hard work and my heart." "That's all I want," Abigail said firmly. "Your heart and a chance to choose my own path." He helped her mount the dappled gray mare he'd brought for her. "We'll ride through the night," he explained. "Head for the territorial line. I've got a friend with a small spread in Wyoming who'll take us in until we can find our own place." The sound of hooves on the packed earth road echoed too loudly in the stillness, making Abigail glance nervously over her shoulder at the looming shape of her father's house. "What if he comes after us?" "He will," Andrew said matter-of-factly. "But we'll have a good head start, and I know these hills better than his men do. We just need to make it across the territorial line." They rode hard through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses at a small stream as false dawn painted the eastern sky. Abigail's body ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. This was the price of freedom, and she would pay it willingly. "You holding up all right?" Andrew asked, offering her his canteen. She nodded, taking a long sip of the cool water. "I've never felt more alive," she admitted. "Scared, but alive." His smile in response was worth every bruise forming on her tender skin. "That's what living feels like," he told her. "Not that cage your father kept you in." As the sun rose fully, they pushed on, Andrew constantly scanning the horizon behind them. By midday, they reached a narrow pass between 2 steep hillsides. "We'll rest the horses here," he decided. "There's good cover and we can see anyone approaching." They dismounted in a small grove of pines, the horses gratefully lowering their heads to crop the sparse grass. Abigail stretched her aching limbs while Andrew dug into his saddlebags and produced some jerky and hardtack. "Not exactly what you're used to," he apologized, offering her the simple fare. "It tastes like freedom," she replied, making him laugh. Their respite was short-lived. The distant sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze, and Andrew's hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "How many?" Abigail whispered, fear clutching at her throat. Andrew crept to the edge of their cover and peered down the trail. "4 riders," he reported grimly, "and your father's at the lead." Panic rose in Abigail's chest. "He'll kill you this time." "No, he won't." Andrew's voice was steady as he helped her back onto her horse. "There's a game trail that branches off about 100 yards ahead. It's narrow and steep, but it'll take us up and over the ridge. They'll have to go around the long way if they want to follow." They set off at a gallop, the hoofbeats behind them growing louder with each passing moment. Abigail could hear her father's voice now, calling her name in a mixture of rage and desperation that made her heart twist, despite everything. The game trail was barely visible, just a thin ribbon winding up the steep hillside between scraggly pines and tumbled boulders. Andrew led the way, his horse picking each step carefully while Abigail followed, trying not to look down at the increasingly steep drop-off to their right. A gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet whining as it ricocheted off a rock near Andrew's head. "Keep going," he shouted, ducking lower in the saddle. Abigail's mare was nervous now, sensing her rider's fear and the danger behind them. The trail narrowed further, forcing them to go single file along a ledge barely wider than the horses' hooves. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Abigail risked a glance back and saw her father and his men at the base of the trail, her father aiming his rifle upward for another shot. "Abigail," her father bellowed, "come back down this instant. Keep moving." Andrew urged quietly from ahead. "We're almost to the top." The next shot struck rock just above Abigail's head, sending stone fragments showering down on her. Her mare reared in fright, hooves pawing at the empty air over the drop-off. For one heart-stopping moment, Abigail felt herself sliding from the saddle, the ground far below seeming to reach up for her. Then Andrew was there, somehow having turned his horse in the narrow space, his strong hand grabbing her arm and steadying her. "I've got you," he said firmly. "Just breathe and hold on." The mare settled, trembling violently but no longer rearing. Andrew kept his hand on Abigail's arm as they continued up the trail, which mercifully widened as they neared the ridge-atop. "They can't follow on horseback," Andrew explained as they crested the ridge and paused to let the horses catch their breath. "The trail's too narrow for inexperienced riders. They'll have to go around, and that'll take them hours." Abigail looked back down the slope to where her father and his men had dismounted, clearly recognizing the impossibility of following them directly. Her father's face, even at this distance, was contorted with fury. "He'll never forgive me," she said softly. Andrew's expression was gentle as he reached for her hand. "Maybe not right away, but someday when he sees you happy, he might understand." They didn't linger, pushing on across the ridge and down the other side, following deer trails through thick pine forests until they reached a wider trail by late afternoon. The Wyoming territorial line was less than 10 miles away now, and they rode with renewed purpose as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains. "There it is," Andrew pointed as they crested a rise just as twilight was gathering. A small wooden sign marked the boundary between Montana Territory and Wyoming Territory. "Once we cross, your father won't have as easy a time. Different jurisdiction." They rode across the line together, both exhaling in relief as they left Montana behind. A mile further on, they came to a small stream where they made camp for the night, both too exhausted to continue. Andrew built a small fire while Abigail tended to the horses, removing their saddles and brushing them down before securing them on long leads that would let them graze. The simple work felt good after the hours of tension. "You handle those horses like you were born to it," Andrew observed as she joined him by the fire. "I always loved the stables," she admitted. "Father thought it wasn't ladylike to spend so much time with the horses, but our stable master taught me anyway." Andrew smiled, the firelight casting shadows across his handsome face. "You're full of surprises, Abigail Irwin." "I'll have a different name soon enough," she said boldly, making him look up sharply. "Is that right?" His voice was careful, measured. "Unless you've changed your mind about marrying me." She tried to sound teasing, but a thread of genuine uncertainty crept into her voice. Andrew moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "I haven't changed my mind, but I want to do right by you. We'll find a preacher in the next town. And then," she asked, "and then we start building that life I promised you." He gestured to the open country around them. "Land's cheap here. Good grazing for cattle. We could start small, work our way up." "It won't be easy," she acknowledged. "No," he agreed, "but we'll be facing it together." He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "Any regrets yet?" Abigail thought of the comfortable life she'd left behind, the fine dresses, the social standing, the security. Then she looked at the man beside her, at the stars overhead, and at the promise of the open land around them. "Not a single one," she said firmly. They reached Andrew's friend's ranch the following afternoon, a modest spread with a small log cabin, a barn, and about 50 head of cattle grazing on the surrounding grassland. Benjamin Taylor was a gruff man in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He welcomed them warmly, not asking questions about their hasty arrival or the way they constantly checked the trail behind them. "Any friend of Andy's is welcome here," he said simply, showing them to a small but clean bunkhouse. "Stay as long as you need." They stayed 2 weeks, helping Benjamin with the daily chores while they rested and planned their next steps. On the 3rd day, they rode into the nearby town of Pine Creek, where the local preacher married them in a brief ceremony with Benjamin and the preacher's wife as witnesses, Abigail Irving. The name felt strange and wonderful on her tongue as they rode back to the ranch, a simple gold band on her finger that Andrew had saved months to buy. "Mrs. Irving," Andrew said with a grin, reaching across to take her hand as they rode side by side. "Has a nice ring to it." "It does," she agreed, squeezing his fingers, "though I suspect my father is still searching for his runaway daughter." Andrew's expression sobered. "Likely so, which is why I've been talking to Benjamin about our options." Benjamin, it turned out, had connections further west in Idaho Territory, where land was opening up for settlement. "Good cattle country," he explained that evening over supper, "and far enough from Montana that you'd be less likely to have trouble finding you." The idea of putting even more distance between themselves and her father's reach was appealing. By the end of their 2nd week at the ranch, they had a plan. Benjamin would give them 10 head of cattle as a wedding gift to start your herd. He insisted when Andrew tried to refuse, and a letter of introduction to his cousin in Silver Falls, Idaho. "It's rough country," Benjamin warned as they prepared to leave. "But good people, and good opportunity for folks willing to work hard." The journey to Silver Falls took 3 weeks, driving their small herd across increasingly rugged terrain. Abigail learned quickly, developing calluses on her hands and a deep tan on her formerly pale skin. The physical labor was exhausting, but she found a deep satisfaction in it that her previous life had never provided. "You're a natural," Andrew told her one evening as they made camp, the cattle settled nearby. "Most city women would have turned back after the first day." "I'm not most women," she reminded him with a smile. "No," he agreed, pulling her close. "You're extraordinary." Silver Falls was barely a town, just a cluster of buildings serving the surrounding ranches and a few hopeful miners searching for silver in the nearby mountains. Benjamin's cousin, Martha Wilkins, ran the town's only boarding house, a 2-story structure that was the grandest building in town. Martha was a widow in her 40s, sharp-eyed and practical, but she welcomed them warmly when they presented Benjamin's letter. "Any kin of Ben's is kin of mine," she declared. "And Lord knows we need more decent folk in this town." She gave them a room at the boarding house while they looked for land, charging them half her usual rate in exchange for help around the place. Andrew quickly found work breaking horses for local ranchers, while Abigail helped Martha with the endless tasks of running the boarding house. "You handle yourself well for a banker's daughter," Martha observed one afternoon as they hung laundry in the yard behind the house. Abigail froze. "How did you know?" Martha chuckled. "Benjamin's letter mentioned you were running from something. The way you hold yourself, the way you talk, it's not hard to see you come from money. But don't worry," she added, seeing Abigail's stricken expression. "Your secret's safe with me." True to her word, Martha never mentioned it again, and she became a valuable ally as Andrew and Abigail searched for land. It was Martha who told them about the abandoned homestead, 5 miles outside town, 160 acres with a dilapidated cabin, a spring-fed creek, and good grazing land. "Owner died last winter," she explained. "No family to claim it. Land office is selling it cheap to anyone willing to take it on." They rode out to see it the next day. The cabin was little more than 4 walls and a leaky roof, the surrounding land overgrown and neglected. But the creek ran clear and strong, the soil was good, and the view of the mountains to the west made Abigail's breath catch. "What do you think?" Andrew asked, watching her face carefully. Abigail turned slowly in a circle, taking it all in. The task ahead would be enormous: rebuilding the cabin, clearing the land, establishing their small herd. Years of hard work stretched before them. "I think it's perfect," she said. They used nearly all their savings to buy the land, moving in immediately despite the cabin's sorry state. The first night, rain leaked through a dozen holes in the roof, forcing them to huddle in the one dry corner. "Still no regrets?" Andrew asked as they shared a blanket, listening to the drip of water on the dirt floor. Abigail laughed, surprising herself with how genuine it felt. "Ask me again when we've fixed the roof." The next months were a blur of backbreaking work. They repaired the cabin bit by bit, patching the roof, replacing broken windows, adding a small porch. Their herd grew slowly as the cattle had calves, and Andrew occasionally brought home a stray he'd found while working for other ranchers. Word of the banker's daughter, who had run off with a cowboy, eventually reached Silver Falls. Abigail heard the whispers when she went into town for supplies, saw the sideways glances and smirks. "There she is, thinks she's a rancher now. Wonder how long before she runs back to Daddy's money. Bet she regrets trading silk for cowhide." The comments stung, but Abigail held her head high, remembering Andrew's words. "Then let them laugh while we build a life." And build they did. By the end of their first year, the cabin was snug and weathertight. Their herd had doubled, and they'd planted a small vegetable garden that produced enough to see them through the winter with careful planning. Their second spring on the homestead brought unexpected news. Abigail was expecting a child. The nearest doctor was in the next town over, 30 miles away, but Martha had delivered more babies than she could count and promised to be there when the time came. Andrew's reaction to the news was a joy to behold, his face transforming with wonder before he swept Abigail into his arms, spinning her around their small cabin. "A child," he kept saying. "Our child." The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness plagued Abigail well into her 5th month, and the physical demands of ranch life didn't ease just because she was carrying a child. Andrew took on more of her chores, rising before dawn and working until well after dark to ensure she could rest. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave," she protested one evening as he stumbled in, exhausted from rebuilding a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm. "Worth it," he said simply, placing his hand on her growing belly. As her time grew nearer, they received an unexpected visitor. Martha arrived one afternoon in early autumn, driving her buggy up to the cabin with unusual haste. "There's a man in town looking for you," she said without preamble. "Well-dressed, Eastern accent, says he's your brother." Abigail gripped the porch railing, her heart racing. "Alexander, here." Alexander Irwin was 5 years Abigail's senior and had always been their father's favorite, practical, business-minded, and utterly devoted to the family banking empire. If he had tracked them down after all this time, it couldn't mean anything good. "What does he want?" Andrew asked, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver he kept at his waist when working the ranch. "Didn't say," Martha replied. "But he's staying at my boarding house and he paid for 2 weeks in advance." Andrew and Abigail exchanged worried glances. "I'll go talk to him," Andrew decided. "You stay here." "No," Abigail said firmly, one hand resting on her 8 months pregnant belly. "He's my brother. We'll face him together." They rode into town the next morning, Abigail uncomfortable but determined in the buggy Andrew had bought secondhand when they learned she was expecting. The 5-mile journey seemed to take forever, tension building with each turn of the wheels. Alexander was waiting on the porch of the boarding house. his tailored suit and polished boots looking absurdly out of place among Silver Falls' dusty streets and weathered buildings. He stood as they approached, his expression unreadable. "Abigail," he said formally as Andrew helped her down from the buggy. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her condition but quickly returned to their usual impassive state. "Alexander," she replied with equal formality. "This is my husband, Andrew Irving." The two men sized each other up, neither offering a hand to shake. Finally, Alexander spoke. "Perhaps we could talk somewhere private." Martha had prepared the boarding house's small parlor for their meeting, providing coffee and then discreetly withdrawing. The three sat in uncomfortable silence until Alexander finally broke it. "Father is dead," he said bluntly. Abigail felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. "What? When?" "3 weeks ago. Heart failure." Alexander's voice softened slightly. "He never recovered from your departure, Abigail. He spent the last 2 years searching for you, hiring detectives, following false leads." Guilt crashed over her like a wave. For all his faults, her father had loved her in his own controlling way. "I never meant to hurt him," she whispered. "Nevertheless, you did." Alexander's tone was matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "But that's not why I'm here." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Father's will. You're named as a beneficiary despite everything." Andrew shifted uncomfortably beside her as Alexander continued. "The bulk of the estate goes to me, of course, as I've been running the bank these past 2 years. But he left you a considerable some $20,000 to be precise." Abigail gasped. It was a fortune enough to transform their struggling ranch into a prosperous operation overnight. Enough to build a proper house, expand their herd, hire help. Enough to make all their dreams achievable in an instant rather than over decades of hard work. Alexander watched her reaction closely. "There's a condition," he added. "You must return to Willow Creek to claim it." And there it was, the trap. Her father's final attempt to control her, even from the grave. "I see," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's a generous offer," Alexander pressed. "More than generous, given the circumstances of your departure." His eyes flickered to Andrew, then back to her. "You could return temporarily, satisfy the terms of the will, then do as you please with the money." Andrew hadn't spoken a word since Alexander's announcement, his face carefully blank. Now he turned to Abigail, his voice low. "It's your decision. Whatever you choose, I'm with you." She looked at him, really looked at him. His hands were calloused from 2 years of ranch work, his face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were patched and worn, a far cry from the finery Alexander wore. But his eyes held the same steadfast love they always had, asking nothing from her that she wasn't willing to give. Abigail turned back to her brother. "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me about Father," she said quietly. "Please convey my condolences to Mother and the rest of the family, but I won't be returning to Willow Creek." Alexander's expression registered genuine surprise. "You're refusing the inheritance, $20,000. I'm refusing the conditions attached to it," she clarified. "This is my home now. This is where my family is." She placed her hand on her belly for emphasis. Her brother stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Look around you, Abigail. You're living in near poverty. Your husband's ranch is barely scraping by. Yes, I asked questions in town before finding you. Your child deserves better than this hardscrabble existence." "My child will have everything that matters," Abigail replied firmly. "Love, freedom. Parents who value hard work and honesty above appearances and social standing." Alexander shook his head in disbelief. "They'll laugh at you, you know. Everyone back home. They already do the banker's educated daughter playing at being a rancher's wife." Andrew finally spoke, his voice steady. "Then let them laugh while we build a life," he said, echoing the words that had given Abigail courage 2 years earlier. "Their laughter won't mean much out here." Alexander stayed in Silver Falls for 3 more days, trying various approaches to change Abigail's mind. He appealed to her sense of family duty, to her concern for her unborn child's future, even to her pride. Nothing worked. On the morning of his departure, he came to the ranch one last time. Abigail was in the vegetable garden when he arrived, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes. "This is your final chance, Abigail," he said, standing stiffly by the garden gate. "The offer won't remain open indefinitely." She straightened slowly, one hand supporting her lower back. "I've made my decision, Alexander. I'm sorry if you can't understand it." Her brother's face softened unexpectedly. "I'm trying to. That's why I've stayed these extra days watching you here. You seem content. It's baffling to me, but I can see it's genuine." "It is," she confirmed. "I've never regretted my choice." Alexander nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A gift," he said awkwardly, holding it out to her. "For the baby." Surprised, Abigail accepted it, carefully unwrapping the paper to reveal a small silver rattle with her family's crest engraved on the handle. It had been a tradition for generations. Every Irwin baby received such a rattle at birth. "Alexander, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll write occasionally," he suggested. "Let us know how you and the child are faring. Mother would appreciate it, even if she's too proud to say so." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes as she nodded. "I will, thank you." After Alexander left, life returned to its steady rhythm on the ranch. The baby, a boy they named Benjamin Alexander Irving, arrived 2 weeks later during the first snowfall of winter. Martha Wilkins delivered him safely, pronouncing him a fine, strong lad with his father's eyes and his mother's chin. Andrew was transformed by fatherhood, his natural protectiveness finding new expression in the tender care he showed his son. He built a cradle from pine wood, carving small horses along the sides that Benjamin would reach for as he grew older. The years that followed brought both hardship and joy. Drought threatened their herd one summer, forcing Andrew to drive the cattle 20 miles to find adequate water. A particularly harsh winter claimed several of their animals despite their best efforts to protect them. But there were triumphs too: the completion of a proper barn, the addition of 2 rooms to their cabin, the slow but steady growth of their herd. And there were more children. Emma Rose arrived 2 years after Benjamin, followed by twins Samuel and Sarah 2 years after that. Their family grew alongside their ranch, filling the once empty homestead with laughter and life. Word reached them occasionally from Willow Creek. Alexander wrote yearly, formal letters that gradually warmed as time passed. Abigail's mother visited once, staying for 2 uncomfortable weeks before departing with the grudging admission that her daughter had made something of this place, despite everything. 5 years after Alexander's visit, a bank draft arrived with no conditions attached. A portion of her inheritance that her brother had fought to release to her, without requiring her return to Willow Creek. They used it wisely, improving their stock, purchasing neighboring land when it became available, hiring their first ranch hand. 10 years after they fled Montana Territory, the Irving Ranch was known throughout the county for its quality cattle and fine horses. The original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable home, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. They weren't wealthy by Eastern standards, but they wanted for nothing important. On the anniversary of their arrival at the homestead, Andrew and Abigail stood on their front porch, watching their 4 children playing in the yard. Benjamin, now 9, was teaching 7-year-old Emma how to throw a lasso, while the 5-year-old twins chased each other around the water pump, shrieking with laughter. "Remember when we first saw this place?" Abigail asked, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. "That leaky cabin, the overgrown land." Andrew slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I remember you turning in a circle, taking it all in and saying it was perfect." "It wasn't then," she admitted, "but it is now." She looked up at him, at the lines time and weather had carved around his eyes, at the touch of gray beginning to appear at his temples. He was more handsome to her now than he had been at 25, his face a map of their shared life. "Any regrets?" he asked, an echo of the question he'd asked so many times in their early days together. Abigail thought of the banking fortune she'd walked away from, the comfortable life she might have had. Then she looked at their children, at the ranch they'd built together, at the man who had given her the courage to choose her own path. "Not a single one," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the sunset painted their land in gold. "They can laugh all they want. What we've built is worth everything." Andrew's smile was as bright as it had been the day they met. "And we're not finished building yet," he promised, his arms tightening around her as their children's laughter filled the evening air, the sweetest sound in all of Idaho Territory.